stay seated. You know, of all the introductions I've ever had, that one by far was the most recent. And after all these great speakers, it is great to be here at RightOnline and Americans for Prosperity Foundation, but I have to say, I feel a little bit like Zsa Zsa Gabor's 8th husband on their honeymoon. I know what I'm supposed to do, I'm just wondering if I can make it interesting. You people in the back can think about that for just a minute. You know, when Mike called me from Americans for Prosperity Foundation, he said, "Hey Jason, how are you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing great." And he says, "I got a question for you." I said, "Sure, what is it?" He said, "Do you believe in free speech?" And I said, "Of course." He said, "How about giving one?" Now I know RightOnline Conference wanted someone here who was young, articulate, good-looking, had high name ID. Unfortunately, George Soros couldn't make it. He had another engagement. I do have a confession to make, though, in all honesty. I have the heart of a liberal. I keep it in a jar on my desk. Right? Before I go into the studio all night, it's just kind of... 30 years ago, a famous president said, "In this present crisis, government is not the solution, government is the problem." I'm here to tell you, no truer words could be spoken with today's crisis. We are, my friends, at a tipping point in this country. When 60% of Americans get more from government than they pay in. When only 51% of the American households pay income taxes, and somebody's taking more out, we have the welfare state. In fact, I would argue we have the welfare state on crack. We are a record number of 44 million Americans on food stamps, 2-year unemployment benefits. That's a heck of a deal if you can get it. We've got a crisis here in government spending that will not be abated until we do one thing, and that is to take a meat axe to the federal budget. Think of where we have come. We have doubled the budget in a decade. We have substituted bailouts for bankruptcy. We are spending 25% of the GDP. You add in state and local government, you add in all of the other fees, and we're spending 45% of our economy by government. That nice spring breeze you're feeling is the founding fathers spinning in their graves. We cannot go on this road any longer. In fact, the road we're on is the road to Athens. The Greek crisis, think about that for a moment. They've got 150% of their economy is in debt, or that is, their debt amounts to 150% of national income. We're almost at 100%. We're not far behind. So we've got a real crisis on our hands. You know, for the young people out there in the blogging community, I like to say, if you didn't live through Jimmy Carter, you're about to get a second chance. The fact is, we've now got stagflation raising its ugly head, 3.6% inflation in the last year, and yet a private sector that is paralyzed by government activism, paralyzed by regulations, paralyzed by diverting so much labor and capital to the public non-productive sector that there's nothing left to grow in the private sector. You know, one of the greatest myths taught in our public schools is that the New Deal got us out of the Depression. Well, I've got news for our history teachers. Years after the New Deal was instituted, by 1938, the unemployment rate was still almost 20%. You cannot substitute capital investment with government consumption. It just doesn't work. We need that capital to grow. We need incentives to grow. You know, the President's 2012 budget blueprint adds $46 trillion in new spending on top of what we're spending now over the next 10 years. $46 trillion in new spending, $1.6 trillion in new taxes, and another $10 trillion to the national debt. We don't have a problem because we don't have a stimulus plan, for crying out loud. We've got a problem because we're still recovering from the last stimulus plan. Now, there is a senator from Iowa, and I can say this because I actually was born in Iowa, but I escaped. But there is a senator in Iowa by the name of Tom Harkin. If you don't know Tom Harkin, let me put it to you this way. He's just to the left of the Dalai Lama. out in D.C. and in Iowa, amongst the ethanol plants and the windmills, running around saying we need stimulus package 3, or is it 4, or is it 5? We've already suffered from the mother of all stimulus packages, known as the housing bubble. And he's out there and he wants more. We don't have a problem of lack of spending or debt. That's exactly the problem. How do you solve a debt crisis? By piling on more debt. But Harkin is out there because the goal is not the economy. The goal is to addict people to government, to get everybody on the dole. And that is the tipping point in which we face. Once you get 51% of the people getting more from government than they pay in, guess what? That's called a Democratic majority. But anybody who takes Tom Harkin's ideas seriously, the idea that we need another stimulus plan, for heaven's sakes, the senator from Iowa, with all due respect, is living proof we haven't won the war on drugs. Now, you add on to this economic disaster of diverting all this private capital to public uses. You add on to the specter of more taxation, believe it or not. I love our liberal friends. They always say, well, top tax rate is 35%. Why, you go back to the Carter era and it was 70%. Yeah, and that was a good period. But you go back before, I always say, you go back before the 16th Amendment and the federal income tax was 0%. Point. But on top of all of this, we have a regulatory apparatus that is absolutely strangling the private sector. We are engaged in energy rationing. Let's be clear what we're doing. Greenhouse gas regulation, the EPA endangerment finding, is energy rationing. Everything you do consumes a fossil fuel. You consume energy, you emit a greenhouse gas. They're going to tell you you can't emit a greenhouse gas, therefore you can't consume energy. That's energy rationing. They're even telling you what kind of light bulb to put in. We've got, according to a Congressional Research Service study just released a couple of weeks ago, 163 billion barrels of oil in the United States. When you combine natural gas, coal, and oil, we have the greatest amount of reserves in the world. But we have a stated policy coming from the environmental left that says we shall, in the United States in 2011, deny access to the people of their own resources. We are the only country that does that. Every other country finds a great oil deposit, they have a tap dance in the streets. We say, oh, great deposit, just don't touch it. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge has 10.4 billion barrels of oil. We only produce about 5 million barrels per day. You could get 1 billion barrels per day out of Anwar. That would increase our domestic production 20%. But we say, no. This frozen tundra, dark for 57 days out of the year, it's just too vital. I don't know about you, but I can hardly wait for my vacation this summer at Anwar. You add on the healthcare regulations. The McKinsey report the other day said, about 30% of the people that have health insurance are not going to have health insurance. They're going to be shoved down to government exchanges. The federal government has taken over everything. This is about first principles. What you do is about first principles. And first principles start with this fundamental point. Government is not reason. Government is not eloquence. Government is not compassion. Government is force, and force must be limited. And the best way to do that is to reinvigorate states' rights. The best way to do that is to remember what Thomas Jefferson called the true theory of the Constitution, and that is federalism. Power divided is power checked. That's a great title for a book. And it truly is. The laboratories of democracies can handle these issues. I don't care whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, pro-gay marriage, anti-gay marriage. I don't care whether you're pro-assisted suicide, pro-medicinal marijuana, or anti. Those issues belong with the states. And that's how we find America again. Thank you very much.